What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time. I'm Kyle Newby at 97.5 The Fanatic and 93.3 WMMR, coming to you weekly with some Philly sports talk. And we've got back-to-back holiday recordings. Last episode on Christmas Eve, today on New Year's Eve. But I'll do some Eagles to kick it off and then get to some Phillies talk. And in the Phillies segment, I'm going to bring on Matt Watson of Philly Sports Network. He's been doing some great work down at Citizens Bank Park. He was there all of last season, and he's gotten a few questions into Dave Dombrowski and Jesus Luzardo in the recent Zoom calls. So Matt's a up-and-coming member of Phillies media, and we're going to bring him on to talk some MLB offseason and look at the Phillies' chances going into 2025. Also, I just want to tease some Flyers stuff upcoming. I promised to get some insight on that healthy scratch of Matvei Michkov. Ask around and see how some people felt about the idea that a healthy scratch can help a young player step back and see the game, something that John Tortorella's talked about. Well, I have asked a few players already. I plan to do a little more digging, but stay tuned, and I'm also going to bring in at least one more good hockey guest in January coming up, so I think we're going to get some good Flyers talk in the upcoming month.
I hate hockey and I don't like kids.
Most of sports radio does hate hockey, so let's get it back to the Eagles. You had a 41-7 blowout over the Dallas Cowboys down at the Link on Sunday, and I had a conversation the other day. I think it's that time of year where a blowout really makes everyone even happier because the Eagles, now they have their spot locked up going into the playoffs. They've clinched the 2 seed. They did not going into the weekend, but you had Two Gloves Pickett out there starting for the injured Jalen Hurts, and the flow of the game allowed everybody to enjoy it without really breaking down the X's and O's, worrying about what the Eagles are going to do in the playoffs. A game in the week between Christmas and New Year's was really just a party down at the South Philadelphia Sports Complex. No better evidence than when A.J. Brown scored that touchdown from the pass from Tanner McKee. It was his first career touchdown pass. A.J. Brown throws it into the crowd without thinking, and everybody laughs it off because they ended up getting the ball back for Tanner McKee. I guess A.J. Brown gave him the game-worn jersey later, so they hooked that guy up, the fan that was cool about it, and gave it back. So you had Pickett in there. I guess he played pretty well. I don't think Kenny Pickett's a good quarterback. You cannot say anything to convince me otherwise. Take a look at that windmill throw he had early in the game. I know he made a few plays. Give him credit for that, especially the 2 throws of Devontae Smith. Put up some touchdowns, but Tanner McKee ends up getting in the game at the end. I think Tanner McKee's a better quarterback than Two Gloves Pickett, but I think the Eagles made the right choice. Put your backup in there. He had 24 career starts entering the game. I think he's better at allowing the playmakers on the team to win the game for you than a guy who doesn't have any NFL experience in Tanner McKee, although I do just trust the tools of McKee so much more than I do with Two Gloves Pickett. But for the sake of the conversation, I'm going to assume Jalen Hurts' health going into the postseason. You'll have the meaningless game against the Giants next week with either Pickett or Tanner McKee starting. We don't have an injury update on Pickett as of the time of this recording on the morning of New Year's Eve. But my confidence level in the Eagles headed into the playoffs is very high for a few different reasons. It almost feels like they have the bye, even though they've clinched the 2 seed. You have the NFC North, these teams fighting it out. The winner of Vikings-Lions on Sunday Night Football is going to be the top seed in the NFC. Get that bye, and that's an enormous advantage, especially in the modern NFL with the new playoff system, for a 1 seed not to make the NFC Championship and host the game is a major disappointment. But it seems like the NFC North teams, and this is one of the best divisions in the modern era, you have the Lions, Vikings, and Packers all in legitimate contention for this conference. But the Vikings played the Packers on Sunday in kind of a division dogfight. Vikings end up on top, making this Sunday night football game in the final week of the season very important. The winner of Lions-Vikings gets the top seed. The loser gets a wild card game and almost a guarantee that they will not host any of the playoff games. The Eagles, on the other hand, have the luxury of resting their star quarterback Jalen Hurts and hopefully getting him back to full health. A lot of this conversation is under that assumption of Jalen Hurts returning healthy, but they also have the luxury and really the option of the luxury of resting their starters in Week 18. They had a low-stress victory over the Cowboys in Week 17 and the option to have a virtual bye headed into the postseason while these NFC North teams slug it out amongst each other. Now, is Nick Sirianni going to decide to waive that potential luxury in order to try to get Saquon Barkley the NFL's single-season all-time rushing record? I don't know if that's a risk worth taking. I think this advantage that the Eagles have has been understated in the entire conversation of this Saquon Barkley debate. Do you start him? Do you rest him? It is bigger than Saquon Barkley, by the way. It would encompass the entire offensive line and probably even other starters on the offense. So keep that in mind when you hear any debates on sports talk radio or anywhere else about whether Saquon Barkley should play in Week 18. My opinion on the debate itself, typically I hate fun things. I usually crap on stuff like this. I don't see why an individual statistic should be greater than the team's overall goals. That's my stance, and I'm going to stick to it. But this is probably the one instance that I'm actually most open to playing an individual to try to get this all-time record. It is a big deal, and the players are acting like it's a big deal. Eric Dickerson's record has held since 1984, and by the way, don't buy for 1 second that it's not a legitimate record. Eric Dickerson broke O.J. Simpson's previous record. O.J. set it in 14, Dickerson in 16, so Saquon Barkley is totally legitimate to set it in more games than Eric Dickerson. The reason that I would consider this a little more if I was in Nick Sirianni's shoes is something that A.J. Brown talked about after the Cowboys game on Sunday.
You want to see him go for the all-time rushing record next week?
Of course, why not? I want to be a part of that, so looking back on the years, I'll say, hey, that's my teammate, and he did it.
It's viewed as a Saquon thing, but you just said, what do you think it would mean for the team if he set that record?
It'll mean a lot, history purpose. Like I said, I like to say, when I'm talking to my kids, I was a part of Saquon when he did that, part of the team when he did that. So who knows what happens next week, so we'll see.
So I get it, and probably a little bit more than I would in other circumstances. Opinion-wise, put myself in that situation. I get where Nick Sirianni would be coming from if he did choose to play Barkley and play the other offensive starters. But if it's me personally, there's no way I'm leaving Saquon Barkley in that game and jeopardizing what I just talked about. The wear and tear that it could put on Barkley and the offensive line and on everybody. That's not even necessarily an injury risk. Just being so banged up late in the season, not having the bye since week 5, and probably getting ready to face a team later in the playoffs that is coming off the bye, whether it is Minnesota or Detroit. So maybe the Eagles will end up throwing out a quick news dump on either New Year's Eve or New Year's Day. Everyone's consumed at the Mummers Parade anyway, but wait for that news to drop. And however Nick Sirianni is going to head into the Giants game on Sunday, we'll probably find out at some point later in the week. But let's get to some Phillies offseason talk with Matt Watson after the break.
If it's happening in Philly sports, Colin Newby's talking about it. Go with him behind the scenes of legendary sports venues with the best athletes and the most iconic media personalities of the greatest sports city in the world.
What's up, Philadelphia? Welcome back to First Time, Long Time, and we got our guest for today, Matt Watson of Philly Sports Network. What's going on, Matt?
Not much. Excited to talk some Phillies baseball with you.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. And first up, I like to make it part of the show a little bit to talk about how people step into professional chances and things. So why don't you tell everybody how you end up at Citizens Bank Park, how you climb into certain things, and how you'll keep doing that moving forward.
Well, working my way over to Citizens Bank Park was quite the experience. Just trying to navigate I guess you can call it the press scene. I mean, figuring out for the first time and just kind of trying to understand what exactly goes into the media side of professional sports, professional baseball was quite the test. But really, once you kind of open up the door for yourself, the possibilities are unlimited. I had a chance to work a couple of the team events that weren't related to games, but were related to different players and their charities and things of that nature. And that really opened the door for me and my team over Philly Sports Network to start working press row. And it was, I want to say, the first Sunday game this season, Citizens Bank Park. Phillies were hosting the Pirates, and we got the opportunity, the green light to work out of the press box for the first time, and I got that honor for our team. So walking up to the stadium before the game was a pretty cool feeling. Nobody else was there, so it was a little weird seeing Citizens Bank Park mostly empty, but just really trying to learn from everybody in the press box. There's a lot of experience and knowledge in that room, which was really cool to just join peers in that sense and learn from some others. So last year was a pretty good year. It was the first year for myself and the team working media, and we're looking to hit the ground running in 2025.
Sure, I say a lot of similar things. It's just when you get these small opportunities, like you're talking about going to events without a press pass, and you just got to launch off these little things and hope they grow into so much, because we see guys down there like Salisbury and Todd Zalecki, been doing it a million years. Not that many people start out and like just as a beat writer anymore, because a lot of these outlets are changing, and people at smaller outlets like us just have to take one thing and run with it.
Sure. Yeah, you have to find whatever little whatever little opening you can find, and just shove your foot in it and make sure you can make it yours, and you do whatever you got to do to stand out and to make people want to work with you and talk to you and just immerse yourself in that environment.
Absolutely. So let's get to the Fightin' Phils. And we had the Zoom call yesterday with Jesus Luzardo. That's the first time the media's had him. So that's a good one to start with. I look at this as the most impactful move they've made. What's your takeaway from the Luzardo trade?
I would agree. It's definitely the most impactful move they've made this offseason, and I think it's arguably the most important. I love the move. Just on its own, you deal Starlin Caba, who I believe is their 5th-ranked prospect by the season's end, and in Marion Bird, who I believe was their 21st prospect. 2 guys that you can absolutely give up for a pretty high-quality pitcher in Luzardo. I think that his injuries last year, and he would tell you, derailed him quite a bit, but the previous 2 seasons in Miami, he was fantastic. I think by adding him to the rotation, it gives them a 1 through 5 that can compete with any club. And honestly, Absolutely. It might be, on paper, the best starting rotation the Phillies have ever had. I know a lot of people like to go back to that 2011 with Halladay, Lee, Hamels, and Oswalt. This might be better than that. And I know for the first half of last year, their starting rotation was nearly untouchable. Adding Luzardo in replace of Taijuan Walker, for example, I think it just gives you that much more depth. He could be on a good team, a number 2 or a number 3 on the Phillies. He's probably going to be their number 4 or their number 5. So it gives them 5 quality options every day of the week. If you're going into a playoff series, it gives you a lot of ammunition for starting pitching, and gives you flexibility with a guy like Ranger Suarez, maybe to move him in and out of the bullpen in a playoff series. But overall, I thought the Luzardo move really changed the temperature in the room when it came to the fan base's expectations and their thoughts of this offseason, and I think it made the Phillies stronger overall.
I think you put it in a really good way there that it changed the temperature of the offseason. I mean, you look around what was going on at the winter meetings and kind of coming up lame in the trade market with Alec Boehm, Juan Soto, Kyle Tucker, these guys going to National League contenders. I think this changes the tides to the point where Phillies fans can feel a little more confident.
Sure, and I know a lot of people wanted to be in on Soto and Tucker and these other big names, but quite frankly, the Phillies have used up their space on big names. I think if you really look at it, they have the top quality guys, and Dave Dombrowski will tell you they have their stars. And I think it just came down to the last year just not playing well. And I know that's a tough pill for people to swallow, but you could have, the National League All-Star team go out there in a playoff series, and they might not win that series. That's what happens with sports. It's not on paper. It's how you perform. And unfortunately for the Phillies, they did not perform when it mattered the most. And I understand from frustration from fans wanting to fix that and make sure that they have the best team possible moving forward. But they still have a really damn good team, and I think it just comes down to these guys performing on the field.
So you kind of touched on something there that I want to dig into. You said they have their fair share of stars, and they do. They have a pretty loaded lineup. The starting rotation, Wheeler, Nola, very expensive pitching staff here. But I've got some ideas why they didn't make the big offseason splash. Why do you think exactly it didn't really happen with some of those bigger names, or whether it's Kyle Tucker? I think Juan Soto was always unrealistic, but think about Santander, Teoscar Hernandez. Why do you think that big splash didn't happen?
Well, first and foremost, I think they just ran out of money. And I know in baseball there's no salary cap and you can spend as much as you want. But when John Middleton sold stake in the company this offseason for new investors, I think that kind of told you where they were financially. They still have one of the higher payrolls in baseball. And I think at the end of this season, you're going to clear a lot of money off the books moving forward, and it's almost like a reset year in a sense. So I think the Phillies did not want to continue to add big contracts to their payroll at this point. I think they wanted to maybe have that soft reset next year. You're still going to have a lot of these guys on long-term deals, but you're looking at guys like Real Muto, Schwarber, Suarez, that's going to free up a significant amount of money by the season's end. Taijuan Walker and Nick Castellanos will be on one-year deals at that point, assuming they're still with the club. So a lot of money's coming off the books next year, and I think that would open back them. I would think it would open them back up to making a big splash. Kyle Tucker is likely to be a free agent next year. Vladdy Guerrero is going to be a free agent next year. So there are going to be names that they could pursue next year. I just think where they are financially this year, they've invested a lot in the team, and I don't think they were willing to double down on that.
I think you're hitting the nail on the head here, especially what you said about the reset year. I don't personally like that from an opinion standpoint, but I think you're spot on. And I think especially the national media maybe overlooked that coming into this offseason. I mean, you think it's the perfect place for this hot stove splash offseason edition. I don't really think that was true. And what you're saying about the salary, the timeline of these contracts lines up with a lot of what they did. And I've been beating the drum on one more idea. Dave Dombrowski's been really aggressive in the past. He's got this reputation. I don't think he's as willing to trade prospects as he has been in the past. There was that one quote where he said the Phillies have kind of rebuilt their farm system in the last couple years, and they're right on the cusp of getting the benefits of that. They don't want to ruin it. That was a surprise to me. Did you look into the prospects much this offseason?
I did, and I almost feel like the reputation with Dombrowski and trading prospects, I feel it's very legitimate, but I feel like he hasn't dealt many prospects here in Philadelphia because, quite honestly, they haven't had a plethora of guys that teams really want. I mean, I know they've moved some guys. They moved a couple pitchers at this deadline that were ranked fairly highly in their system. They've moved guys in the past under Dombrowski, but what we're looking at is Andrew Painter Aiden Miller, Justin Crawford as guys that other teams would want. And I don't think the Phillies were just going to part with them just to part with them.
Yeah.
I know that they supposedly had a deal in place with the White Sox at the trade deadline that would have included, Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford for Garrett Crochet. So there is that willingness from Dombrowski. I just don't think that the farm system's as deep as the Phillies want it to be. Right. And by trading their top guys, it would have really left them strapped. And especially when you have a player like Andrew Painter, who could potentially, break out like we saw Paul Skeens do this past year with the Pirates. So I just think they'd be willing to trade prospects if they had more prospects. I think it's a situation where you don't want to bleed the top of your system at this point because the rest of it still has some catching up to do. I think they've done a good job in recent years in turning it around and adding more depth. Obviously, they've drained it a little bit with a few of the moves they've made, but I think overall, they're still at least a year or two away from having a system that you could say, yeah, you could trade 3-4 prospects for a big name and still be okay. I don't think if they were to deal Crawford and Miller, for example, that their prospect, their pool and their overall ranking in Major League Baseball would be that high.
Sure, and one other element that I think's gone a little bit under-discussed, if you look at Starlin Caba, he was the centerpiece of the Luzardo deal. He's only 19, and then that kind of matches up with what they did at the trade deadline. George Clausen was the big piece of the Carlos Estevez deal. He's a little further away from Major League ready, so I think these guys that are coming up sooner, they're a little bit more hesitant to trade, where the younger prospects who have a longer way to develop, maybe they're a little bit more willing to do that. But we'll end on one big picture question here. Where do you see them in the pecking order next season? I mean, you got the Mets. They added the superstar in Soto. You got the Braves. They did lose Max Fried, but it's Atlanta. They're going to be up there. Dodgers probably World Series favorite, but who's the NL East favorite in your eyes?
The division specifically, I would still give the edge to the Braves. I think that making the postseason last year without Strider and Acuna, and they had guys injured throughout the season, I would give Atlanta the edge. I know the Phillies just knocked them off the top in a sense for the first time in a long time. The Braves have run the National League East for most of the century, honestly. But I would give the Braves the nod, especially with when healthy, even though they lost Fried and they've made a few smaller moves. I would go to the Phillies second. I think that they're stronger overall than the Mets are. I know New York caught fire in the second half of last year. They made that great playoff run, but they had a lot of one-year guys on that team. I think Soto is obviously a tremendous addition, but I don't think that their starting pitching depth nor their bullpen is that strong,
right.
And that's where I feel like the Phillies really thrive. So I would give the Phillies the nod for second place, the Mets for third, and I would not count out the Nationals to make a run this year. I truly think that some of the young talent is going to shine over a full 162 season. The addition of Josh Bell, he's going to destroy the National League East competition like he always
does, right?
Yep. So I think the Nationals are in it. I think it's a 4-team race with the Braves probably coming out on top and the Phillies nestling into that top wildcard spot.
Great stuff, Matt, and I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time for the show. A lot of substance, a lot of things we just got into. So thanks for joining us, and we'll catch up soon, all right?
Dude, I appreciate you having me.
Ton of good insight there from Matt Watson. Again, check out his work at phillysportsnetwork.com. Follow him on Twitter. The handle is at Matt Watson Media, MattWatson Media, MEDIA. Matt's doing some great work, grinding at the ballpark a lot. And I told him after we hung up, just had a few minutes to catch up on the Zoom call. I love how much he is able to just jump right into a flow. Such good rhythm, so caught up on the Phillies offseason. He really is a very thorough writer and a good developing member of the Philadelphia media. That's going to do it for this week. Stay tuned. We're going to get some big Flyers talk coming up in the month of January and land a few big guests. Tune in next week, Philly. This has been First Time, Long Time.